What's up, everybody? It's been a while. I'm back with another EM Weekly, and this week we are going to be talking all about the upcoming eclipse. Now, the eclipse is only, affecting a swath of the country, very big swath of the country. But everything that we're going to talk about in this episode is also something you could use for just sort of general preparedness and readiness around large events. So, almost every community has some sort of large event. And that's relative, right? Like if you're a community that only has, a few thousand people that live in it, and there's, some big graduation ceremony for your local school, that could be a large event because it taxes your resources. It's something that's very much out of the ordinary, might impact your infrastructure, all that stuff. So we're going to be talking about it in kind of a generalized sense, but I'm also going to touch on a lot of stuff that is very specific to the eclipse and the impacts that this will have on a lot of communities, including the one that I live in, which is directly in the path of totality. So I'm super excited about this. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about some stuff we should be doing right now, some stuff you probably should have already done, but there's still time. We got a couple weeks and things to start to prepare for. But first, let's get through our ads and sponsors.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
Okay, we are back. So, the eclipse is, first, if you're not really sure if this is something you should be preparing for or thinking about it, if your community is in the path of totality, you 100% should, because you will be impacted no matter what, especially if you're a community that has like vacationers and stuff, tourists that come through. But it is everyone that I watched a bunch of videos and the people who have seen it have said it's like truly a life-changing experience. So it's a big deal. And in addition to that, it is so extraordinarily weird to go through that even if you don't have the influx of visitors and all this other stuff, there's going to be impacts. People are going to like get distracted, crash their cars, just all this kind of like weird stuff that happens with a, it's just all of a sudden the lights go out, right? I mean, it's just wild. So everyone should sort of be thinking about this. But if you're a community that has already started to talk about and anticipate a significant amount of visitors, you should be you really should be at this point in the finalization of your planning process. So what are those concerns? So Vermont, our total population is, I think, somewhere between like 650, 700,000. So we're a small state. I mean, we're kind of a medium-sized city across the entire state as far as population goes. But we're expecting a increase in visitors of at least 100,000 plus. And I've read up to 250,000 additional visitors. So we are taking potentially, we're increasing maybe a quarter of our population. I don't think that math is right. It's a third. Yeah, we could be increasing almost a third of our population. And the last time we had anything near this was there was a Fish concert, the jam band up in Highgate, which is actually near me. And it shut down roads. It overwhelmed all the local resources. It overwhelmed businesses, right? Like they're just trying to keep up with that level of population. But it was a big deal. And if you ask anyone who responded to that and, was on scene sort of supporting that event, it was a cluster. It was a lot. And they still remember it. So we're talking potentially tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands more people than that event. Now, yes, distributed across a larger portion of the state, but the path to totality is supposed to cut through sort of the northwest part of the state. So any community that is expecting that, the challenges are going to be the same. So first and foremost, like the one that I think most people are going to see is the increased traffic and just general visitors, right? So what does this cause downstream? More traffic, more vehicles on the road, for roads that maybe aren't designed for it. It's going to increase congestion, which is going to impact your ability to respond to different parts of your community quickly enough. People who show up are going to be buying lots of stuff. So if all of a sudden your community's got extra, tens of thousands of people, things that will be really important, such as food and water, the logistics cycle of stores and stuff probably are not really changing, specifically for this. Some stores might order extra things that they think visitors will want, but it's going to cause a lot of problems. And what else, might happen is you're going to have cars, if you don't have the parking for this, people just start putting their cars everywhere, right? So blocking fire hydrants, maybe blocking emergency exits. So for first responders and emergency managers, you should start to think about your traffic plan, working with, the towing services if you need to clear people out. Talking about, well, what happens if, it totally devolves? When the interstates shut down for the Fish concert, that wasn't because of like cars sort of stuck in traffic. It's because people literally just abandoned their cars on the highway and walked to the concert. And when that happens, there's nothing you can pull up behind the line of cars with your fire truck and run your siren all day. If there's no one in the cars, you're not moving. So how do you make sure that you keep those routes open? And what do you do if you can't, right? Like, what is the option? Are we just going to let buildings burn because we can't get there? Or are you going to start to think about like, well, what are the alternative ways that we can figure this out? Impacts on critical infrastructure also come to that, right? So I'm talking critical infrastructure such as healthcare, hospital systems, doctors' offices, walk-in clinics, all of that stuff. All of a sudden you've got, like I said, our biggest city in Vermont is about 45,000 people. That's Burlington. My little community is anticipating, potentially a good chunk of that population for a community that is, when we're on a busy day, it's usually like, I think around 15,000. So if all of a sudden we're increasing our population greater than the biggest city, but we don't have any of that infrastructure that Burlington does, and they're going to be overwhelmed because they're going to have a huge increase. All of a sudden your ERs are going to be, overwhelmed because all of those people that come in bring in all of the problems that they had when they were at home, right? Health concerns, injuries from recreational stuff. If it's nice out, a lot of people are going to be out on boats. They're going to be, kayaking, swimming, riding bikes around, all the fun stuff that, Vermont has to offer for the outdoors, meaning that they're going to get injured and everything else. With an increase, in call volume, our ambulance services in this state, just like in most communities, are pretty limited, right? Like they're almost always sort of running at capacity. And a lot of our state relies on volunteers. So starting to think about like, okay, well, do we maybe staff an extra ambulance, right? Staff an extra engine, all the police, whether you're off, that you think you're going to be off that day or not, we're recalling everyone to work just, at least for the period when we're expecting the most excitement, which is kind of like noon to like maybe 6 o'clock, to try to account for people getting there, setting up, enjoying the show, and then trying to get out of there. And of course at night it'll be busy, and in the morning it'll be busy because people who, are likely to get here, probably a couple days before hang out, and they're obviously likely going to stay after the event to hang out as well. So figure that out, right? Like start to understand, like talk to your local hotels and see like, hey, what does your, booking look like? Is everything filled? If every single hotel in your community is booked and you're like, okay, when was the last time we kind of had this situation? What did that do to our community? Like, was the ambulance running a lot more? Were we running more police calls? All this stuff. Fire alarms are likely more likely going off. Airbnb and all those sort of short-term rentals, campsites, they're all going to be filled as well. So have we, done a run through on the campsites, recently? Like, again, everything is going to be at the highest volume possible. On top of that, you're going to have communication issues. your cell networks could be overwhelmed, especially if something happens during the incident. So if you're not, you should probably sign up for FirstNet. FirstNet's awesome. Actual preempt. You got your own sort of lane for communications. I've been a FirstNet user for, I think like 4 years now. Yeah, 4 or 5 years. I was the first. We got our first agency in the state to convert to FirstNet was UVM Police when I worked there. So FirstNet, if you don't have that, you can certainly try to use wireless priority service and GETS and WPS, which is the card. It's probably a little late to get that, but if you do have it, it is an option. Personally, I have been in a lot of situations where the community, cell towers should have been overwhelmed, and I did not ever use WPS and GETS because it's kind of a pain. It's not very easy, and unless you're really important, you only kind of get bumped up like one more tier. So, but you just have to think about that. Okay, so if the cell networks are going to be overwhelmed, possibly, go down, are you talking to your local communication providers and figuring out, can you bring in additional resources? Do we set up FirstNet towers? We have, portable systems like the Colts and the Cows. Would it be an appropriate situation to try to get those in place in case something happens? And alternatives, right? Like your radio communication systems. Do you have enough radios if you bring in everyone, right? Like some departments only run enough to have radios on your primary trucks or your, the police officers that are on duty. You might not have spares. So if you're bringing this huge group of people in, how does that work? What kind of stuff can you do? And then do you have a communications plan so that if you start to have these issues, your PACE plan, your primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, as things collapse and roll over, you have that next plan. And what happens if it all goes down, right? And especially when you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people who may not be familiar with your area, may not be familiar where fire departments and police departments and hospitals and all that stuff is. So if they have an emergency, they may not even know where to go. And what happens if they can't get there? So, if you have a huge, huge crowd of people and everyone starts dropping because it's also hot out, probably not going to happen in my area, but April can get up there. We've had Aprils where we've had 70 degree plus days, which doesn't sound very hot, but when it's cold for the last 6 months, that's 70 degrees, or if your body's not acclimated to it, can be pretty miserable. So just thinking about that. Okay, cool. We have to make sure that we have some sort of plan for so maybe putting up some signage, right? Like what should you do if your cell phone isn't working? Because there's going to be, especially people who are filming and maybe streaming it, FaceTiming with the system's going to probably get overwhelmed no matter what. So maybe just putting signs around your gathering places, right? The parks, the events, and just saying hey, in an event of emergency, if your cell phone doesn't work, here's what you should do, right? Go to a landline. There'll be maybe some rallying points where you'll have public safety people sort of spread throughout your community so that someone could walk up and talk to them. Come up with something. Again, we're kind of on the tail end of the planning process for this, but it's definitely worth taking the effort to do that. And then public safety, think about your folks as well. Anything that you send out could get stuck there, right? If you're sending police officers and maybe staging fire and EMS at your gathering sites, the big events, they may not actually be able to transport out of there if there's something that goes down, and you may not be able to get them help if they're calling for it. So making sure you communicate okay, do we have enough stuff there? The worst case scenario planning, right? So if you're expecting a gathering of thousands of people, what is the thing that scares you the most? A mass casualty event, a car plowing through, the fence, some sort of, intentional act, all these things where you need a lot of stuff really, really quickly. So thinking about that, and then thinking about, okay, how do we sustain this potentially for a long time if there's no help? And then what do we do when we need to get that help? Think about it in kind of the same way the military thinks about it, right? If you're on a forward operating base, what they plan for is sort of the daily injuries that they need. And then the mass CAS, type of event where all of a sudden you're overloaded and now you need to deal with a ton of trauma and sustain that treatment for at least, a period of time until you can get transported. I mean, it's the exact same thing. So make sure that your folks have the ability to communicate, that they have what they need for sort of their daily stuff, that they have what they need for a surge of some kind if something were to happen, and then sustainment for at least a period of time. All the meds and fluids and bandages and tourniquets, all that stuff, just try to be ready because we're not sure how long it could take to get help there. Even like things that we're not thinking about, right? Like do all of your responders have the Eclipse glasses, the ones that are actually certified and will protect their eyes as the eclipse is happening? Because again, they're human. They're going to want to watch this. Yes, of course, the police are going to be trying to keep an eye on what's going on. But like, you're at a once in a lifetime event, you're going to want to look, and you want to make sure that your folks are going to be safe, because if they injure their eyes in the middle of this and then something happens, now you've got all of the headaches of a workplace injury. On top of like you just lost one of your responders because now they can't see, and then the long-term impacts of that as well. Heat-related illness and hydration and general first aid, right? Like anytime you have a big, large event, depending on the temperature, if you have a high temp, high humidity day and you don't have enough water, you don't have enough cooling areas, you just have to anticipate that there's going to be a lot of heat injuries, and those can quickly overwhelm resources because everyone experiences the heat and humidity. We all sort of like deal with it differently. I remember working the Vermont City Marathon. It's tens of thousands of people come in for this marathon, and it was hot when we started. It's May. Again, we're coming out of our colder months, so not all of us are acclimated, but even by like just normal standards, it was hot and humid. And by mid-morning, we were like, this is going to be bad. And sure enough, they ended up having to stop the event because it was just like this constant radio call of like, run her down. They're just transporting people all over the place. And that's on top of just the other medical issues that happen during a large event, and exacerbated by all of the health. So if you've got prior health issues and stuff, the heat and humidity are not going to help you feel better, right? You got a heart condition, some sort of, diabetes, any of these things where like sudden changes in your body's chemistry, temperature, all of this can overwhelm your own system. And then a problem that, maybe was manageable under the best of circumstances now becomes much more unmanageable, and you're going to need some help. So again, just thinking about all that stuff, like how do we deal with this? How do we prepare for this? And what things can we do ahead of time? Like putting out, if the temperature looks like it's going to be hot, try to set up cooling stations. Make sure maybe you're ordering extra hydration, requesting, some water resources from the National Guard or whatever else. And in some cases, this means, you might want to think about how are we sort of posturing ourselves for this event. I posted something on LinkedIn last week that I think you may have seen, and I think it's worth considering. And that is, or I guess it was a couple weeks ago, declaring a state of emergency. Right, like there is in many states, you have the ability to declare a state of emergency ahead of time, so that you open up certain resources, requests, funding. It might change how the laws work, so that you have a little bit more leeway to get what you need. And doing this preemptively, so that you don't have to deal with it the day of when everything is hitting the fan. And now you're like, oh my gosh, I really wish I had better prepared for this. On top of, the preparedness and readiness aspect, like if you haven't started planning for this, it's not too late, but you got a lot of catch up to do. Every community that is going to be within the path of totality will have some sort of impact. And if you haven't heard from your state or your county or even your local resources thinking about this, you need to get that conversation going right now. And there are a lot of resources out there, but you should plan in the same way that you plan for any special event, bringing in large populations. And if you're sort of like, oh my God, is it too late? It's not. In fact, there are so many resources. So the last time this occurred, states put together the planning materials and stuff. A lot of lessons learned came out of that have been implemented in this the most recent one. So there are tons of after action reports that you can go through that talk about, where did they miss, right? And then what worked really, really well that we would do next time. There's a ton of planning guides out currently. Every, kind of federal agency that has any connection to, emergency management or first responders has produced documents. So CISA has a document. FEMA has been kind of sprinkling out, various documents, specific to the eclipse. But either way, the goal is to, just go through the motions of a normal planning process. So, first get your stakeholders together, right? And that means get the wide breadth of stakeholders in your community, including your recreation department, your planning, all the folks that are sort of involved in the event planning process that maybe you're not always involved in, your first responders, your local businesses, because again, everyone's going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be a resource in this. That public-private partnership is really important. Hospitals, health departments, just tap into everyone you can, all your populations that might need help due to health, mobility, or other concerns. Get those folks involved and start that planning process. Do your assessment. What are the things that we're most concerned about? For our community related to this event. Mass casualty, traffic concerns, security. Critical infrastructure. Start to document those, do your probability and then the consequence, what happens if this happens, figure out like what are the ones that we have to plan for, the top, 3, top 5, top 10, whatever you sort of use as your baseline. And then write out some plans, right? Like start to just get some rough stuff in and, at least like, okay, here's how we think it'll go. And with 2 weeks, you could still run a couple tabletops, get people together, half hour to an hour. I just saw Indiana has a really cool tabletop in a box for the eclipse, and you can change that to, any state, county, local that you want. And they've got it built in, which is really handy. So, definitely try to take advantage of the resources that are already there. You don't have to come up with this stuff on your own. But you do need to start, running through some exercises so that you can sort of test your plan. So if you already had a plan, and if not, see if your new plans are going to hold water and actually be effective. Start to communicate with all of those folks, right? Like, what are the concerns that you have? Start to share that with your community. Get your PIOs involved. If you don't have a PIO, that means you're the PIO. So start to send out messaging and talking about like what to do if the cell networks go down. What do you expect people to do if roads are blocked? What should they do ahead of time? Should they go out and travel? Should the locals maybe hide out? All these things that you want them to do ahead of time, like stockpiling equipment, discussing what to do if there's a medical emergency and help isn't arriving, right? So all these things that we can be doing ahead of time to make our life easier when it happens. And then making sure, are people signed up for your mass notification system? Your alert and warning program should be on top of that. And if they aren't, start to open that up and figure out, can we bring in new people into our mass notification system, right? So depending on your system, there's usually some way you can text a number or use a hashtag, some sort of way that you can sign up just in time for that system so that you can start to capture visitors who you otherwise may not get the messaging, right? You always have WIA, in the iPause network. But if you are trying to share information that's not an emergency yet, but if it doesn't get out there, it could eventually become an emergency, routine things like road closures, maybe issues related to, hey, the hospital's at capacity. So if you need, only go there if you have a true medical emergency. If you're having routine issues, call a doctor, go through the clinic, all that type of stuff. Use that system for that. So, it's also a good time because it's captured everyone's attention and interest to, get people signed up on your systems and sort of involved in emergency planning and preparedness and readiness. Maybe figure out, are there volunteer opportunities for people to help out with this event? Then you can use those folks for other future stuff. So Get the community involved, get your messaging out right now. All right, so I came up with a bunch of questions just to sort of go over stuff that, I wanted to think about, like, what would you all be thinking about? So what can emergency managers do to prepare their communities for increased traffic and influx of visitors? So we talked about that a little bit, but first and foremost, identify your choke points. What are the biggest concerns? What are roads that absolutely cannot be blocked? And how are you going to keep those open? Have you communicated to hotels, campgrounds, all your Airbnbs and stuff to say, like, hey, this is great. We're going to do a lot of business for this event. But we also need to make sure that, we're all partners in this. Can you tell your guests to park in the appropriate areas? Figure out where is the overflow, because there's probably not going to be enough parking in the communities that are in the path of totality for the most part to be able to handle that influx. So do you have mass transit stuff? Can you park people sort of in areas that are outside of there that, otherwise would not be getting used this day? Park and rides or a lot of schools have shut down. So can you use school parking lots to help with that influx? And then busing people to and from events so that they're not all parked right there, right? Because that's going to be your main concern, is not the outskirts of town where there's not really a whole lot going on. It's going to be usually in the heart of the community, in the parks and, in the event areas. If you can get cars out of those and park everyone else sort of on the outside, that's going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to response. How can healthcare facilities and emergency services prepare for a surge in demand during the eclipse? A lot of that has to do with just asking for extra help ahead of time, right? Like, get your folks in there. And it sucks because a lot of people are going to want to sit there and watch the eclipse. Come up with a plan for that, right? Like, figure out a way to rotate people through so at least they can go outside, enjoy it. It's a pretty short event. So it's not like we're talking about, shutting everything down for hours. The actual real event is only, I think it's less than 10 minutes, right? So if they have the opportunity to get out and check it out, figure out some alternative options for that. Just try to get people to enjoy it for sure. Because if you don't have a plan for that, people are going to be like, well, I'm taking my day off. I had it scheduled a long time ago and too bad. Or you got to do the bad guy thing and basically say, yeah, we're canceling all leave for, essential personnel. But there you go, right there. Identify your essential personnel ahead of time. I know, especially for, any agency that has, unions, if you don't have a good plan for that, you're going to be dealing with grievances for the next 6 months. So, make sure that you understand your agreements and that you can get the resources there effectively. And then think about how do we surge medical stuff, right? Like setting up first aid tents at the site. So maybe you can address all the minor stuff right there. Having a mass casualty, plan, MCI type plan in place with, your routes and transport options already planned, your hospital surges already planned. Our local community hospital, can handle normal stuff, but any trauma, we're going to have to really fly them out. The hospital will be overwhelmed very quickly with just a few traumas. So it's got to go to our level 1, which is down in Burlington, or we start to fly out everywhere else. And we got to remember, for my region anyways, where most of our hospitals are in Boston and stuff, they're actually going to probably see a lot of people, they're actually going to lighten the load a little bit because a lot of people are heading towards our state to try to take advantage of the path of totality and hanging out. And in fact, this whole region is very rural with very limited hospital infrastructure. It's a lot of community hospitals. So start to talk to your other hospital networks and your doctor's offices and stuff and see what are they doing. And you might also find that some doctor's offices might close, right? They want to be a part of this. And so, okay, those other things that we can use as a buffer during a, medical surge, we might not have the access to, if they're part of your plan, obviously, trying to roll in random doctor's offices in the middle of a mass casualty is probably not a great idea. How can local authorities manage crowds and ensure public safety during the eclipse? Again, this is one of those once in a lifetime events. So you trying to come in there and say, yeah, we're going to shut this down. It's probably not going to happen. Leadership and stuff, unless it's really, really significant, you're just going to have to figure it out and manage it and try to plan just think of those worst case scenarios, be creative, right? Anytime I get a group of people and we're doing sort of a planning session, we're talking about what could happen. Allow people to think off the wall, truly judgment-free, free flow, creativity. Come up with like the weirdest scenario, right? Like, what are we going to do if, all of a sudden a weird, doomsday cult that's been waiting, 100 years for this event shows up? What are we going to do with, no one shows up and we have all these resources? How do we move this stuff? Like maybe we thought we were more popular than we are, right? So just go through all the different scenarios and try to just game out, what could and what may not happen. What do you have in-house? Like, where can you get that stuff? Again, think of like sort of the unfolding of this event, right? Your local resources are overwhelmed, but that path of totality is pretty narrow. And yes, of course, you'll have like people staying in locally, regional areas, but how far out do we have to go to start to get that help? What lessons can we learn from previous Eclipse events? Go through those after action reports. There's so many. I read a ton of them, and a lot of them are really, really good. And Tennessee had a really good one that had tons and tons of information about what they saw, what they learned, why things worked, why they didn't. You don't have to be the first person to come up with this, right? Like there's tons of communities that were involved in the last major eclipse, and they've already done it. And then contact your other locals, right? Your county, your state. Everyone is probably thinking about this. So just, collaborate and say, hey, we have all this other stuff. Do you think maybe you could share some of your resources? And I'm sure that they're going to. All right, we're 2 weeks out. What do we need to do? Review and finalize emergency plans if you haven't. Make sure everyone's got the right copy, the most up-to-date one. Any changes you're communicating. So making sure that you're actually marking your documents with the dates or the versions, however you do that locally. And that you are confirming that everyone has received them. Coordinate with your partner agencies. At this point, hopefully you have those relationships. If not, just start reaching out and saying, like, what are you doing and how can we collaborate? What are you going to, and the other main thing is like, what do you anticipate having available for this event? Are you opening your EOCs? Are you opening your department operations centers? Are dispatch centers, planning for surge? Are police departments, planning for this? So like, just think of like all the people that might need to be involved. Like I said, even the ones that you may not normally work with, your rec departments, your local business associations, all of those folks, just kind of reach out and get a final touch point for the event. Make sure that everyone's on board. Keep communicating with the public. Tell them everything you know, everything they need to know. No one should have, get to the point of the event and then go, well, no one told me, right? And that means trying to utilize all of the resources. Not everyone's online. Not everyone's going to be signed up for your mass notification system. Do you have cork boards in front of your local, gas stations that you can put stuff up on? At the all your local stores. A lot of places are kind of like, especially businesses and stuff, are already coordinating, the event for promotions and other stuff. You could probably just send them a document and they'll just include it with that so that they can print it out and put it in their stores and stuff. So, just try to get that stuff out there ahead of time, and then communicating like the most important stuff. Have a plan, wear your glasses, keep hydrated, all that stuff. You got 2 weeks to test all your, kind of give a stress test on all of your equipment. And so if you're going to be using your radio system, using new channels, are you going to use repeater system? Are you going to have some tactical channels? What are the sort of ranges of those, and, how reliable are they? Do you have the backups? Do you have your pace plan? Do you need signboards? Are they secure with the information? So, people putting bad messaging up, all of that stuff. Do you need water, medical equipment, additional traffic safety stuff, whatever, extra, vehicles? Do you need to make some mutual aid requests? Whatever. Test that stuff now ahead of time. Get some final training and briefings, right? Like, get everyone, if there's stuff that they're going to be doing that they're not used to, get trained on it, right? Set up a opportunity to do, a traffic incident management system plan. If you haven't done TIMS, you can go online now. I think it's respondersafety.org. All the traffic incident management stuff you could possibly ever want to need is on there. And that's going to be desperately needed for this. Conduct final trainings and briefings. Again, do it now, get it early. the briefings and stuff. Make sure everyone's got the right information, the most up-to-date information, okay? Keep an eye on what's happening. Monitor the situation. Watch those weather reports. We're too far out now for any obviously reliable weather condition, but continue to monitor that. And as it gets closer, monitor and update and adjust your plans as necessary, right? Like if the weather is absolutely going to be nightmarish, you'll get the hardcore people for sure. But a lot of people will probably alter their plans if, there's no chance of actually seeing the event. Even without, the clear skies, it's still going to be an experience. Like all of a sudden, all the lights going out in the middle of the day is pretty serious. So just keep an eye on that, monitor traffic stuff. Try to check in with your hotels and your businesses to see what they're hearing and what they're expecting. And then finally, set up your EOC plan. Like you're probably going to have to open an emergency operations center just because with everything being sort of taxed, as much and as fun as it is to do everything remotely, it's nice. Having everyone in the same room during a event like this is probably the right idea. And if not, at least get it to warm status so that if you need to pull the trigger and open it up, you can. So, have all that stuff ready just in case. And if you can open it up or come up with an alternative, right? You want to get people close to the situation. Maybe you have your mobile command post or a mobile EOC that you set up so that you're a little bit, more involved. Whatever the plan is, test it out, make sure the generators work, make sure the batteries are good. If you haven't used it in a while, do all the lights work? Do you have internet? Are the computers updated? All this stuff that you don't want to have to discover the day of. And make sure you have paper backups, just in case everything else fails. But yeah, we're in the final throes of this. I'm excited. You should be excited. If you have stuff that, you thought of that I didn't mention, post it in the comments, comment, share this. Everyone who's in the path to totality, we're in this together. So I'm really excited to see this. This is it's a once in a lifetime thing. Don't treat this like it's, like this is a big deal. It's going to be awesome. People are excited for it. So let's get out there, enjoy the eclipse, like, comment, share, tell me what you thought. Again, any ideas that you have that I didn't mention would be great. And we are getting close. So sooner the better. And we'll talk soon.